I froze in the hallway as she dropped my gift straight into the trash, without even opening it. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I watched her throw it away like it meant nothing. She smiled at dinner 5 minutes later, like she hadn't just hidden something in the trash. I gave her something priceless, and she didn't even check what it was before tossing it. The box was gone before dessert, and I knew exactly who took it. I thought she loved being part of this family, until I saw what she did in the kitchen. I had one chance to see who she really was, and she failed in under 10 seconds. She said she loved everything I gave her, but the trash said otherwise. I didn't plan to test her, but the moment I saw that box in the trash, everything changed. I walked into the kitchen at the worst possible moment, and what I saw I can't unsee. I stopped in the hallway when I heard the trash lid lift and saw her standing there with the velvet box I had handed her not even an hour ago, her fingers turning it over like she was deciding whether it was worth the effort. She didn't look around at first, which somehow made it worse, like she wasn't worried about being seen, like there was nothing about this that needed to be hidden. Then she gave a quick glance toward the dining room, just enough to check if anyone was watching, and dropped it in with a soft, careless thud before letting the lid fall shut. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misunderstood what I saw. Maybe she'd set it down. Maybe she was coming back for it. But she wiped her hands on her dress like she was done with it and walked out without looking back. I stayed exactly where I was, half hidden behind the corner, my hand still resting against the wall because something in my chest had tightened so suddenly it caught me off guard. I could hear voices from the dining room, my son laughing at something, glasses clinking, her voice slipping right back into the conversation like nothing had happened. And that was the part that didn't sit right with me. I waited longer than I needed to, long enough for the moment to settle into something real, before I stepped into the kitchen and stood in front of the trash can, staring at it like it might explain itself if I gave it enough time. The lid creaked when I lifted it, and there it was, the velvet already smudged and pressed under a layer of coffee grounds and paper towels, like it had been there for hours instead of seconds. I reached in slowly, careful not to think too much about what I was doing, and pulled it out, brushing it off with the edge of my sleeve while my fingers hovered over the clasp. I hesitated, just for a second, because opening it felt like confirming something I wasn't ready to name yet, but I did it anyway. The hinge gave softly, and the heirloom sat exactly where it should be, untouched, which meant she hadn't even opened it, not even out of curiosity. I closed the lid again, a little more carefully than I meant to, and stood there listening to the faint hum of conversation from the other room, trying to match the version of her I had just seen with the one laughing down the hall. It didn't line up. I set the box on the counter for a moment, my fingers lingering on it as I replayed the last hour in my head, every word, every expression, looking for something I might have missed. Nothing stood out, which made this feel less like a mistake and more like a choice. When I walked back toward the dining room, I slowed just before the doorway, watching her from a distance as she leaned back in her chair, smiling at something my son said, completely at ease, like the last 10 minutes hadn't happened. And standing there, with the box still in my hand, I realized I didn't actually know why she had thrown it away, and that unsettled me more than the act itself. I stepped into the dining room with the box still in my hand and took my seat like nothing was wrong. But I didn't put it down, not yet, because I wanted to see if she would notice it was back. She didn't. She kept talking, smiling, reaching for her glass, completely relaxed, and that calm felt off now, like I was watching someone play a part I hadn't realized was a performance before. My son leaned in toward her, saying something under his breath that made her laugh, and for a second I wondered if he knew, if this was something they had already talked about, something I wasn't supposed to understand. I set the box beside my plate, just close enough to catch her eye if she looked up, but she didn't glance at it once, not even by accident, and that told me she either didn't expect it to be there, or she didn't care that it was. I tried to follow the conversation, but every word sounded distant, like I was listening from another room, because my attention kept drifting back to her hands, the way she moved them, the way she avoided reaching too far across the table. Then I noticed it, her phone lighting up beside her plate, screen angled just enough that I could see a message preview flash and disappear before she quickly turned it face down. Her expression shifted for a split second, something tighter, more alert, before she smoothed it over and looked back up at my son like nothing had happened. That was new. I hadn't seen that before. A few minutes later, she excused herself, saying she needed to check on something in the kitchen, and my chest tightened again because the timing was too exact, like she was responding to something I couldn't see. I waited just long enough not to draw attention, then stood quietly and followed, stopping short of the doorway when I heard her voice. Low, hurried, nothing like the easy tone she'd used at the table. "No, I told you I got rid of it," she said, her back to me, one hand pressed to her forehead while the other held her phone close. I froze. "I didn't open it. I didn't touch anything inside. It's done," she continued, sharper now, like she was defending herself. There was a pause, and then she turned slightly, pacing once across the kitchen floor. "Because you said it wasn't safe," she added, quieter this time, but I heard it clearly enough for something cold to settle in my stomach. Not safe. My grip tightened around the velvet box still in my hand. For a second, I wondered if I'd misunderstood, if this was about something else entirely. But then she exhaled hard and said, "I'm not risking this over some family keepsake, okay?" The words landed wrong, too specific, too connected, and suddenly this didn't feel like carelessness anymore. It felt intentional. I stepped back before she could turn and see me, my heart beating faster now, not just from what I'd seen, but from what I hadn't expected, that this wasn't about disrespect or indifference or even a mistake. This was about something she thought she needed to get rid of. And as I looked down at the box in my hand, still closed, still holding something she had been told was not safe, one question pushed everything else aside. What exactly had I just given her? I stood there in the hallway with the box in my hand, her words still echoing in my head. "You said it wasn't safe." And for the first time since my husband gave it to me, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before: doubt. I didn't go back to the table right away. I went the other way, straight to my study, closing the door quietly behind me like I was afraid of being seen with it. The room felt smaller than usual, the air heavier, as I set the velvet box down on the desk and stared at it, really stared this time, not as a memory, not as something sacred, but as an object that someone else had just called dangerous. My fingers hovered over the clasp, and I hesitated, not because I was afraid of what it meant emotionally, but because now I wasn't sure what it was physically. Then I opened it again, slower this time, paying attention to details I had ignored for years. The heirloom sat exactly where it always had, a small, intricate piece of jewelry that looked delicate enough to be harmless, but something about it felt different now, like I was seeing it without the weight of memory protecting it. I picked it up carefully, turning it in the light, noticing a faint seam along the side I had never questioned before, a line so subtle it blended into the design unless you were looking for it. My breath caught. I pressed lightly against it, and for a second nothing happened. Then there was a soft click, almost inaudible, and the piece shifted in my hand. I froze. Because inside, hidden where no one would ever think to look, was something that didn't belong, something small, metallic, precise. Not decorative. Not sentimental. Functional. My mind raced back to my husband, to the way he had pressed the box into my hands, the way he had looked at me. Not just emotional, but serious, almost urgent. And suddenly his words didn't feel like a blessing anymore. They felt like instructions I had misunderstood. I heard movement in the hallway, footsteps approaching faster now, and before I could close the piece or even process what I was holding, the door pushed open. She stood there, breath slightly uneven, her eyes going straight to my hands, and whatever she saw in my expression made hers change instantly. No more pretending, no more softness, just sharp, focused intent. "You weren't supposed to open that," she said, and her voice was lower than I'd ever heard it, stripped of anything familiar. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. Because in that moment, everything shifted. The dinner, the trash, the phone call. It all snapped into place in a way that made my chest tighten for a completely different reason. "What is this?" I asked finally, my voice quieter than I expected, but steady enough. She stepped closer, slow, controlled, like she was measuring the distance between us. "Something your husband never told you the truth about," she replied, and there was no hesitation in it, no doubt. Behind her, I could see my son in the hallway now, his expression confused, trying to read a situation that had already gone too far ahead of him. I looked back down at the object in my hand, then at the box, then at her. "You told someone you got rid of it," I said. "Why?" Her jaw tightened just slightly. "Because it wasn't supposed to stay in this house," she said, "and neither was what's inside it." The words didn't feel dramatic. They felt final. Like something that had already been decided long before tonight. My grip on the heirloom tightened, and for the first time, I realized this wasn't about whether she belonged in this family. It was about what my husband had brought into it without telling me. I thought I had been testing her, judging her, deciding her place. But standing there with both of them watching me, I understood something I hadn't seen before. That whatever this was, whatever he had left behind, she hadn't thrown it away out of disrespect. She had tried to remove it, and I had just opened it. I closed the box slowly, the soft click echoing louder than it should have, and lifted my eyes back to hers. Neither of us spoke, because the truth didn't feel like something you said out loud. It felt like something you realized too late. And as I stood there holding the one thing I thought defined my family, I couldn't tell if I had just protected it or exposed all of us to something that should have stayed buried.